Okay, hello everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Nico. I'll be the host for the webinar today. Thank you all for joining in. This webinar is on phase 3 testing and everything you need to know to prepare for when it becomes live as a requirement December 31st. So before we get started, a quick disclaimer. We are not lawyers. We at CoA are not lawyers, nor are we a law firm, and we do not provide legal, business, or tax advice. So this webinar is CoA's interpretation of the BCC regulations. So as always, check with your own compliance or legal teams before making any decisions that may have legal or compliance ramifications. With that, a couple more housekeeping items. So we'll be answering questions after each speaker. So please type your questions into the chat or comment box. You can find the little chat icon on this screenshot that is being displayed right now. It's at the bottom of your screen. And if there are any questions that arise after the webinar is over, you can always get in contact with myself, Michael, or Jess by emailing compliance@gocleva.com. Finally, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation and uploading a video of the webinar. So there's no need to scribble down any notes or screenshot everything. Just feel free to listen and follow along. So with that, let's get started. Very quickly, again, I'm Nico. I will be hosting the webinar today. I am on the sales ops team, so I work very closely with our wholesale sales team and our other internal teams, such as our ops and supply chain teams, to ensure that everyone has what they need to get products consistently and reliably to our end customers. Joining me today are two wonderful folks from our internal team. We have Michael Bell, who's our CoA Coordinator. He has been with CoA for 2.5 years. He's a member of our internal CoA Labs team. He works very closely with our third-party testing labs to ensure that every one of our CoA products has CoAs and that the CoAs are readily available for anyone who needs them. And we also have Jess Box, who's our compliance manager. She's been with CoA for 3 years. She's a member of the compliance team and is also very lovingly referred to as the Duchess of Compliance. She's a certified compliance and ethics professional, or CCEP. She works very closely with all of our internal departments to aid with better business practices in alignment with the state. So with that, I'm going to turn the proverbial mic over to Michael Bell, who's going to talk us through CoA Labs and our commitment to safety. So Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Nico. Yeah. As Nico just mentioned, I'm Michael Bell. I'm the CoA Coordinator, or Certificate of Analysis Coordinator. And what that means is that I coordinate all compliance testing that happens at CoA. And I also coordinate some R&D testing and work with our ag science team to always ensure that we're compliant and delivering the safe, accurate, cannabis to our consumers. So I'm just going to first go on what is a compliance test, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation and confusion in the industry. So first off, are all lab reports from a state certified lab or from a state certified lab an actual state CoA? The short answer is no. So a state compliance test is a set of tests and procedures carried out by a certified lab that's mandated by the BCC, or Bureau of Cannabis Control, and the CDPH, or California Department of Public Health, which includes potency and terpene analysis, which is essentially for accurate dosage of the cannabis as medicine, microbial, pesticide, and residual solvent screening, and then there's also some more once phase 3 becomes implemented, as well as the fact that the batch has to be sampled by a member of the compliance lab team. And that's very, very crucial, because I think that there is some misinformation out there, and a lot of people think that, oh, I'm a distributor or I'm a manufacturer, I'm going to take a sample of my product and then submit it to a certified compliance lab like Enresco, SCL, one of those big labs out there. But if you get that lab report back, that's not an actual compliance test, because all compliance tests have to be sampled by a member of that compliance lab team. So it's still beneficial to do R&D, or end progress tests, as they're called in the industry. For example, if you're an oil manufacturer and you have bulk oil, it's beneficial to do an R&D test through these labs so you know how it's going to fare before you put it into packaging, before you put it into the vape cartridges. Because I know that's an expensive process and you don't want to put something that's going to fail testing. So just a little bit about CoA Analytical Lab. We've been around since July 2016. We are not a compliance lab because we're vertically integrated. CoA is a distributor, grow operation, and also manufacturer. So it prevents us from having a certificate for a compliance lab. However, we still use our lab for a lot of benefits. And again, it really goes to that commitment to customer safety. We've been testing cannabis both for potency and also for safety 6 months prior to cannabis becoming recreationally legal, and therefore mandated testing was mandated by the state. And that just goes to the fact that we're really, really committed to delivering good products that we grow ourselves and also that we distribute ourselves from other vendors to our customers to know that it's accurate and safe for consumption. We're always trying to stay ahead of compliance in that sense. So this is a little PDF that I was able to get from the BCC, or again, the Bureau of Cannabis Control. And it kind of dictates or describes all the different phases of testing. Currently, we are in phase 2 because it's past the date of July 1st. But December 31st is just around the corner, and that will be the implementation of phase 3 testing. So phase 3 testing is going to require terpenoid analysis if you request it, or if you do a label claim. So if you have X amount of a certain terpene on your packaging, that will be tested by the state lab, and it will be audited in that sense. Mycotoxin testing. A mycotoxin is a toxin that's produced by a fungus. Specifically, Aspergillus is one of the main producers of these mycotoxins that they require screening for. Aspergillus is a microbe that it is known to be grown on cannabis if you have poor agriculture practices. And mycotoxins will be produced by those Aspergillus if you have a very, very high level of moisture. Usually mycotoxin production does not happen in cannabis, but if you, again, poor agriculture practices or poor management practices, you can allow Aspergillus to start producing mycotoxins. And then one of the last things that phase 3 is going to implement, and I think it's a little bit more critical right now, is heavy metal analysis. So the heavy metals that they're looking for are arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, which a lot of people are saying, like, I don't think that's ever going to be in my flour, or I don't think that's ever going to be in any type of product that I test. But the FDA actually requires heavy metal screening for almost all agriculture products. So most of the the fruit and vegetables that you buy from the store, they've had the same heavy metal screening that's now going to be required for cannabis. So it's not necessarily a new type of test. And heavy metals are known to be uptake by plants if they're grown outdoor in soils that do have it. So for instance, we live here in the Bay Area. Quicksilver mines is something that I'm sure some of our listeners are aware of. Quicksilver is a term for mercury. So mercury mining was a big thing that happened here in the Bay Area for a long time, and there are levels of mercury in your soil. So if you're an outdoor farmer and you're growing outdoors here in the Bay Area, that's something I would be very, very critical of, because you could have mercury being uptook in your flour. So again, it's one of those things. We're always trying to stay ahead of the compliance, not just for ourselves, but also for a commitment to customer safety. Just to kind of go on a little bit about how Caliva is doing with phase 3 inventory. We've currently passed 18 batches for 174 or 170.4 pounds of flour, one large batch of pre-rolls, about 37 pounds, and then we have 3,403 units of vapes, all past phase 3 compliance testing. So something we're very, very proud at here at Caliva. But we also have 19 batches pending with 379.8 pounds of flour, and then 8,368 vapes pending phase 3 testing, and many more to come after that. We're always striving to get more and more with phase 3 testing for commitment to customer safety. So currently we're about 70% of all compliance tests on a weekly basis are phase 3, and every week that number is going up. So it's something I'm very, very proud to be a part of. And then, so what's next with Caliva Labs, beyond compliance? We're always working with our ag science team. We're always trying to strive for a higher standard of quality for potency and accuracy, as well as preventing other pests that the industry or the compliance doesn't mandate right now. So PM or other insects or something that's kind of in that realm that the BCC doesn't directly mandate, but it's something that we're always trying to stay ahead of from a preventive standpoint. But it's something in the industry that we know is a problem, and something we're always trying to work with others and work with other labs to get on top of and prevent from happening in the first place.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. I know that a lot of our listeners, a lot of them may not realize that Caliva has such a wonderful laboratory as a resource for us internally. So again, if anyone wants to contact Michael with any questions on testing, how to interpret a CoA, that sort of thing, please email compliance@gocaliva.com. And also, if you have any questions for Michael while he's here, please go ahead and start typing into that chat screen. We will start answering, fielding some questions. Looks like we're getting some fantastic questions already. Keep typing them in. Michael, here's one. Let's see. Can you list the heavy metals that are going to be tested again?
Yeah, I would love to. So it's lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. Lead and mercury are the two that I would be more critical here in the Bay Area. Lead is something that if you don't treat your water well, you could have lead in your water at very, very trace amounts. Something for drinking glass water is totally fine, but it will show up on a compliance test if you're not doing an RO filtration system for your water. So if you're a producer out there, I highly recommend using a water filtration system to try to remove that out. Also, if you're an outdoor farmer, here in the Bay Area specifically, mercury and other heavy metals are known to be uptake in the soil. So you can actually do soil analysis before you start growing to make sure that you don't have these heavy metals in the areas that you're trying to grow outdoors. So let's say you have a nice outdoor piece of land. Before even like putting a single seed down, I highly recommend doing some soil analysis.
Great. Okay, thank you. Great. Another question here. Can you tell me more about the water activity testing of semi-solid materials? Is this part of heavy metals analysis?
Really good question. I'm actually really happy you brought that up because it's something I actually meant to go over a little bit more. But so water activity is a measure of moisture. And more specifically, it's a measure of how much moisture is in your system that microbes can use to produce. So it doesn't really have to do anything with heavy metals. It's actually a lot more involved with microbial testing. So earlier I mentioned that Aspergillus, if it's given enough moisture, it can start producing mycotoxins. There's a level of water activity that will start to happen. So water activity is basically how much water is available for microbes to use. It's usually on a scale from 0 to 1. 0.65 is going to be the mandated level because that's very, very known in the industry. If you have a water activity of above 0.65 or near it, actually, microbes will start growing. So something that I don't think any of us want in our cannabis.
Great. Another one. Caliva Labs is not a certified third-party lab, but what lab does Caliva work with, and why did Caliva choose to work with the state lab that we did?
I am currently working with many different labs, and I don't like to say one lab is different than another. They're all better in different ways, I would say, but really what I recommend doing is selecting a few different labs and then doing your own comparative study. Like take one sample that you know how it's going to test and then send it as a blind sample to many labs to kind of pair them against each other and see which ones give you the accuracy that you're looking for. Because honestly, I don't want to speak to one lab or another, but certain labs seem to have a better understanding of how to test solvents or edibles versus flour. And so it really depends on what you're looking for, as well as turnaround time and general accuracy.
Okay, great. And then one final question here. Let's see. So many fantastic questions. Okay, can you talk us through the sampling process for phase 3 testing of vape cartridges? Just kind of what that process looks like.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something I'm very, very involved in because, obviously part of my job with the compliance testing coordinator. But what you usually do is you have a relationship with your compliance testing lab, and sometimes you do it via email or on an online portal, but you have to request the lab to come on site for compliance testing of your vape products. Vape products are something that has to be in the final package state. So you have to obviously put the oil inside the vape cartridge, put the vape cartridge inside of its final box, all final packaging. So it's very, very compliant. Once you have all those boxes ready to go, the compliance lab will come on site, sample the product. The sample that they take is usually dependent on the size of the total batch size. If you're testing, usually a lot of the compliance batches that I've seen move through the industry for vape products because they're expensive for manufacturing, around 3,000 units. In that case, and the lab that you're working with, it usually take 15 to 20, depending on what the lab's needs are for compliance testing. Phase 3, because there's a lot of tests involved, and heavy metals, kind of unfortunate, takes a lot of oil to get accurate results. So a lot of labs are requesting 20 cartridges or 10 grams of oil in order to do a test at a minimum. Again, if you ramp up your total batch size, the lab will require to take more, but once they come on site, they sample the product. You know, the Enresco or the lab sampler is the one doing it. They'll take that back to their lab, test it, and then email you over or return the CoA or the certificate of analysis that will stay usually state certified at the top, and therefore you know pass or fail of how your product done from a compliance standpoint.
Cool, great. Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate all your insight and commitment to Cleveland Labs.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on, Nico.
Yeah, and again, folks, if you have any questions after or as they're coming up, as we're transitioning over to have a chat with Jess, feel free to email compliance@gocleva.com, and someone from our team will happily respond to any questions that you may have. So with that, I am going to pass the mic over to Jess Box, who is our compliance manager. And to kick it off, I guess, Jess, it's true then that phase 3 testing is starting December 31st, eh?
It is very true, but it's not too early and it's not too late to start testing for phase 3 now. Get ahead of the game.
Okay.
As we all know, we're approaching the end of 2018, which triggers the implementation of the final phase of state compliance testing, which is phase 3. So starting December 31st, any cannabis goods entering the retail market have to be tested in accordance with the California Business and Professions Code and the Bureau of Cannabis Control Regulation. If you want to check out those sections, they are links to them are provided below. They're also in the resources at the end of the deck. So feel free to read through those and take a look at things. And so we're just going to walk through this past year, the implementation of phase 1 and now to the implementation of phase 3, make sure we're all on the same page and we have a clear picture as to how we're moving forward into 2019. So with the phase 1 implementation, that came January 1st, 2018. All goods entering the market at that time had to be tested under phase 1 requirements, which is the cannabinoids, Cat 1 pesticides, and category 2 solvents, microbial impurities, and moisture content. The goods that were held in a licensee's inventory at the time of licensure didn't have to be tested. They could be transported and sold through 6/30/2018 as long as a label was applied that stated the goods hadn't been tested as required. Moving along, we hit phase 2, which was July 1st, 2018. The phase 2 implementation had the phase 1 items as well as the category 1 solvents, category 2 pesticides, and foreign materials. Phase 1 goods were still eligible for the retail market as long as they were harvested and manufactured prior to 7/1. But at this point, untested goods that were in the market at the beginning of the year could no longer be sold, and they had to either pass testing or be destroyed. I think with that phase, there was a lot of confusion that transitioned over to this phase because product had to be destroyed if it wasn't tested. And so when we were approaching phase 3, there were a lot of questions that we were getting. Well, can we still accept phase 1 product? What about phase 2? Is that even good for the market anymore? The short answer is yes. Now that we're entering phase 3, there's the phase 1 and 2 testing requirements, as well as terpenoids, mycotoxins, heavy metals, and water activity. And just to be clear, that goods harvested or manufactured before 12/31 are still eligible for the retail market and may be tested under phase 1 requirements or phase 2 if prior to 12/31. Nothing needs to be destroyed this time around. Michael already briefly touched on this, so I'm not going to go through it too much, but we just wanted to provide you with a link and the website for accessing the compliance testing chart. One thing that I will note is that the homogeneity requirement for edible cannabis products does seem to be stricken out of the proposed regulations. So we're still looking into that to see if that's something that we need to pay close attention to.
Can you talk through that a little bit? Like what does that mean for?
Basically, the edible cannabis products had to be homogenized, so they were all blended together, and that the sample was coming from the overall product and not just a piece of it. So that way the cannabis and the terpenoids or cannabinoids were evenly distributed throughout the goods.
Got it.
Some important details to note on the phase 3 implementation. All goods harvested or manufactured before December 31st can be transported and sold as long as they meet phase 1 or 2 testing requirements. But that doesn't mean companies should delay phase 3 testing. Industry experts have suggested that phase 3 will cause laboratory fees to increase by 40 to 50%, and they anticipate a longer turnaround time for products, at least in the beginning part of the transition. So as all the licensees are adjusting to the new requirements. And something that we just read today, which I thought was interesting, was that state data, according to state data, there's already thousands of licensed cannabis cultivators, processors, and manufacturers, and only 52 licensed laboratories at this point. Right now, only 14 of the 52 labs have confirmed that they are currently offering phase 3 testing. Not all of them have replied, so there's likely more out there, but the number is pretty low considering the amount of businesses out there right now. We highly anticipate seeing a bottleneck with the testing as we did in July when those were implemented. And another interesting fact that was written into the regulations is that cannabis goods that haven't been transported to retail within 12 months of the date on the certificate of analysis, or the CoA, have to be destroyed or retested by the distributor in the possession of the goods. So retailers need to start paying attention as they're intaking product to make sure that the date isn't past the 12-month limit.
So to, I guess, say this a different way, that just means that come January 2nd, if a retailer receives a CoA where the CoA date is January 1st, that exceeds the 12-month date and that CoA is no longer valid, that product has to be retested. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the retailer would have to reject the order in full. The goods would have to be retested under the applicable phase.
Got it.
And then if they pass, then they could enter the retail market. If not, then remediation or destruction.
Right.
And one thing I like to note is that if you have questions, ask the BCC. That's what they're there for. They're happy to respond to questions instead of having you try and interpret them yourselves. So don't hesitate to reach out. I know that they're a regulatory body, but they're there to help. They want to make the program run as smoothly as possible. So try not to be too scared of them. A lot of people are wondering how phase 3 impacts their business. Well, a lot of businesses were caught off guard by the implementation of the July 1 testing requirements, which I found to be a little funny since they were written into the regs since January. But things like the phase and testing requirements do take time to implement. It's not something you can necessarily do overnight. So if you haven't started yet, now's the time to make moves to implement the coming regulations. Not only just testing, but the other changes that were just written into the regulations as well. If you wait until the transition on December 31st, you may end up having to wait to get your products into the supply chain as well. So that's just something to be aware of. But on a licensee basis, how does phase 3 impact you? For retailers, it's just, again, noting that you can still purchase and sell phase 1 and 2 goods if tested during the applicable phase, and that you should be paying close attention to the date on the CoA and rejecting any that are more than 12 months old. For distributors, you want to make sure that the lab you're working with is able to conduct phase 3 testing. The CoAs may expire that you have for the product that you have in your possession, and you may need to retest or destroy the goods. And phase 1 and 2 goods can still be transported and sold if they were tested during the applicable phases. Cultivators and manufacturers need to know that the goods you harvest or manufacture in January and beyond will be phase 3 tested, no doubt about it. And consider internal or on-site testing to ensure your CoAs have a high pass rate. It does help with our internal operations a lot.
One quick clarification here, because I see the phrase, if tested during the applicable phase, quite a few times on this slide. If I'm interpreting that correct, that means that for phase 1, that's from January 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2018. And then phase 2 is July 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And as Michael mentioned, we have already begun our phase 3 testing. We started that some time ago now. So right now, the compliance and the legal teams, we're shifting our focus to the permanent regulations that were just submitted to the California Office of Administrative Law for review. We are working with our internal compliance and legal teams to interpret and set new standards for COLIVA. A couple things that we're paying close attention to is the BCC section 5416, which allows delivery into any jurisdiction in the state. Considering we have 2 non-storefront retail licenses, one in San Jose and one in Brisbane, we were pretty excited about that because it opens up a lot more areas in between us. Another one that the whole industry was pretty excited about was the switch and changes to the child-resistant exit packaging or product packaging sections. The BCC is now allowing through January 2020 for products to be packaged in non-CR goods as long as they leave the building, the retailer's facility, in a child-resistant exit package. So this opens things up a lot. It gives people more time to get their packaging correct, and hopefully will ease some of the rejections that we've seen in our store. Another one is the restriction to third-party companies from being able to deliver cannabis for a licensed dispensary. They're allowing tech companies to facilitate deliveries, but no profits can be generated from those sales. So those are the few of the things that we have our eye on, but there's many, many more. And then lastly, I just wanted to leave you guys with a couple resources because there's just a lot of information that we dumped on you guys in the last 30 minutes. So it's some takeaways that you can read into yourself. There's the link to the compliance testing chart, the business and professions code. Pay attention to 26100 and 26104 for this section, the information on testing. And then there's a link to all the proposed regulations that have been submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for review, as well as the BCC's contact information if you have any questions.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Jess. So everyone who is listening in, now is the time to start typing in your questions into the Q&A section or the chat section of the screen there, and we will start fielding them right away. So go ahead and type them in. Let's see, we'll start off with this first question. Can products produced before 12/31/2018 that have passed phase 2 but not phase 3 be sold in 2019? So it's kind of an interesting one. So they were produced or manufactured or cultivated before 2018, but they passed phase 2. Can they be sold in 2019?
Yeah, they should be able to. As long as it was before that 12/31 date and the goods were tested and the CoA is valid, there's no reason they can't be on the retail market.
Great. That is a great question. Let's see. Other questions. Okay. So I believe that is it. Pending any other questions, as always, if there are any questions that pop up after this webinar, as you're talking with your teams, feel free to email compliance@gocaliva.com. But please note again that we are not a legal entity and we cannot by law give legal or tax advice. All of this is just our interpretation of the BCC's regulations. So with that, thank you so much for tuning into this COLIVA webinar, and we look forward to hosting another one very soon.